What you are looking at is one plant that will run every motor on your place. The diesel truck, the gas car, the generator, the tractor, even the lawn mower. Every one. And right now, legal and out in the open, we are raising it here in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, in the same ground my great-great-grandfather worked 300 years back. When my last video went up, the same question came back from every corner. What about the gasoline engine? Well, I heard you. And the answer is one, the oil men buried for 80 years. Because this plant does not hand you one fuel, it hands you two. One feeds a diesel motor, one feeds a gasoline motor. No changes to the vehicle, no special parts, no mechanic. And back in 2010, the University of Connecticut settled it with one number. The oil men would sooner you never saw, 97%. Once you grasp what that number means, you will understand why this plant was outlawed in 1937. But first, a piece of paper from that year wiped this plant out of American life for 80 years. 4 men whose names you already know. 2,000 fuel stations that vanished off the Midwest the year that law got signed. Stay with me. It does not matter if you own your house, if you have never put a seed in the dirt, or if you rent the ground under your feet. What my people have always known will work on a 1/4 acre with nothing but a shed and a pickup. Right down the road from my place sits East Hempfield Township. Most folks drive past that sign without a second thought, taking it for one of those worn-out Pennsylvania names nobody studies anymore. But I know exactly what it means, because my own people gave it that name. Out behind my barn sits a glass jar that looks for all the world like cooking oil. The first time my grandfather tipped it into our little diesel tractor, I was just a boy, and I stood there waiting for the engine to cough and quit. It caught on the first turn. It did not hesitate. It did not sputter, not a wisp of black smoke. I waited a 1/4 hour for it to choke out, and it simply ran. When I asked my grandfather where a man buys such fuel, he gave me a look like I had asked the most foolish question in Lancaster County. He nodded at the field out past the barn. We grew it, he told me. And that was the moment the whole thing settled into me for good. Hemp. That is the plant. Plain industrial hemp, what they call cannabis sativa. And I want to be plain, because the mix-up between hemp and marijuana was cooked up on purpose. Industrial hemp carries less than 0.3% THC. That is the part that gets a person high. You could light up a whole bale and walk away with nothing worse than a scratchy throat. The Farm Bill of 2018 made it lawful at the federal level to grow, process, haul, and sell anywhere in the United States. The law now treats it like any other crop, like corn, like soybeans, like a stand of wheat. Yet for the 80 years before that bill, it handled hemp like a hard drug, and the reason had nothing to do with anybody getting high. The whole fight was over fuel and over money, in the hands of men who held more of it than anyone in America. Let me begin with what this one plant truly does. Because once that settles in, the rest of this story will make your blood boil. Hemp seeds run about 30 to 35% oil by weight. You squeeze that oil out with a plain cold press, the same sort used for olive oil or sunflower oil. Once the oil is in hand, it becomes biodiesel through a simple bit of chemistry they call transesterification. You stir the oil with methanol and a touch of lye, which sets the reaction going. The batch reacts, then splits in two. Up top floats the raw biodiesel. Down below sits glycerin, which you can turn into soap. Wash it down with water. Give it a day to dry. And it is ready to go into any diesel engine ever built. Not rebuilt, not special, any diesel engine at all. And here is why. The diesel engine was never meant to burn petroleum to begin with. Rudolf Diesel built it in Germany back in the 1890s and filed the patent on the 28th of February, 1892. He titled his paper, roughly, The Theory and the Construction of a Rational Heat Engine, one built to replace the steam engine. A compression ignition engine, he called it, and the fuel he had in mind was oil pressed from plants. In the year 1900, he showed it off at the Paris World Exposition. The French had asked that he run it on peanut oil out of their African colonies, and so he did. It ran so quiet and smooth that most of the crowd never realized it was burning plant oil. Diesel put it in writing that his engine could feed on vegetable oils and would do a great deal to push farming forward. He dreamed of a world where every farmer raised his own fuel in his own field. The oil engine, he named it. And then the man died. On the 29th of September, 1913, Diesel boarded the mail steamer Dresden at Antwerp in Belgium, bound for England to meet the British Royal Navy about fitting his engines into their submarines. He took supper aboard, turned in at 10 o'clock, and left word to be woken at 6:15. When the steward knocked, the cabin sat empty. The bed had not been touched. His nightshirt lay folded neat. His watch was set where a man in bed could read it. His hat and overcoat turned up folded under the railing at the stern. 10 days on, a Dutch fishing crew hauled up a body adrift in the North Sea, too far gone to name. They emptied its pockets, and Diesel's son later swore the things were his father's. Two sorts of headline ran that week. Some cried suicide. The others ran darker. Inventor flung into the sea to stop his patents reaching the British government. Murdered by men working for the big oil trusts. His wife opened a satchel he had handed her before sailing. Inside sat 200,000 German marks in cash, with papers showing their accounts all but emptied. And in his diary, a small cross sat beside the date, September 29th. We may never know what truly happened aboard that ship. But look hard at the timing. The man who built the most efficient engine the world had seen. The man who said out loud that plant oils would one day matter as much as petroleum. The man only days from handing the British Navy a motor that ran on crops in place of crude. That man vanished into the water. And with him gone, not a soul at the engine companies fought to keep plant oil as the standard. Nobody asked the farmers. The petroleum outfits moved in, reworked the fuel systems, and made crude oil diesel the default. Inside of 10 years, every diesel engine on Earth was running on petroleum. An engine built to set farmers loose had become the machine that tied them to an oil company. And nobody paused to ask how, because the one man who would have asked had sunk to the bottom of the English Channel. Now, a lot of you wrote in asking flat out about gasoline engines. The car, the lawnmower, the chainsaw. This is where that second fuel walks in, and it carries us straight back to what Henry Ford spent years trying to tell folks 100 years ago. Once you have brought in the hemp seeds for their oil, you still have the whole stalk left over. Thousands of pounds, an acre of woody, fibrous stuff loaded with cellulose. And through a process they call cellulolysis. The cellulose breaks down into simple sugars. Those sugars ferment, and the fermenting throws off ethanol. The same alcohol already stirred into the gasoline you pump today. Every gallon of regular gas in America holds as much as 10% ethanol already. They call that blend E10. The only difference is that the station's ethanol was made from corn. The ethanol from hemp comes off the stalks of a plant that already gave you biodiesel from its own seeds. One plant, two fuels, two kinds of engine, and nothing thrown away. Henry Ford saw all this long before anybody else did. Back in 1908, his Model T was built to run on gasoline, on ethanol, or any mix of the two. Ford told the New York Times in 1925 that the fuel of tomorrow would come out of fruit, out of weeds, out of sawdust, out of most anything. In every scrap of vegetable matter that will ferment, he said, there is fuel. And in 1 year's crop off a single acre of potatoes, enough alcohol to run the machinery that tends those fields for 100 years. By the 1930s, Ford was hosting gatherings in Dearborn, Michigan, around a movement called farm chemergy. The word is stitched from chemistry and the old Greek term for work. The notion was bold and plain. Let farmers raise the raw goods industry needs, instead of pulling it all from petroleum. Ford backed it with his own money. At his Iron Mountain works in Michigan, he ran a biomass conversion plant that handled hemp alongside other crops. It pulled out tar, pitch, methanol, charcoal fuel, and ethyl acetate. Every one a building block of modern industry, and every one drawn from crops that came up in a single season. In August of 1941, Ford rolled out a prototype automobile whose body panels were molded from hemp, soy, wheat, straw, and flax, all set in resin. Popular Mechanics ran a piece on it. The New York Times wrote it up. Those panels came in lighter than fiberglass. Ford showed how strong they were, on camera, by taking an axe to the trunk lid. The axe sprang back. The panel never so much as dimpled, and the car was built to run on hemp ethanol. Ford even brought in George Washington Carver to lend a hand. He pictured a machine grown straight from the soil and fueled by it. The man was 77, swinging an axe at an automobile he was sure would change the world. But by then, the hour had passed. Something done 4 years before had buried all of it for 80 years. 4 short years. That was all it took to wipe out a plant that had been part of America for 200 years. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act became law. Pay mind to the spelling. Marijuana, with an H in it. That was no accident. The word was Mexican slang. Harry Anslinger, who ran the Federal Bureau of Narcotics as its first commissioner, reached for it precisely because most Americans had never heard it. Call the plant cannabis, and every doctor in the land would have known it on sight. Call it hemp, and every farmer would have. By naming it marijuana, he cut the rope between a useful crop and the law written to do away with it. Before he ever took the narcotics post, Anslinger had said in public that there was no more foolish notion than the idea that cannabis drove a man to violence. He did not reckon it a problem at all. But Prohibition ended in 1933, and the office he sat over was about to vanish. He needed a fresh enemy, and cannabis was made into that enemy. What is more, he had friends who wanted it gone for reasons of their own. William Randolph Hearst held newspaper chains, vast timberland, and paper mills coast to coast. Hemp turned out paper cheaper and quicker than wood pulp ever could. To his business, that was a straight-on threat. The DuPont family had just patented nylon, along with a new chemical method of making paper from wood. Hemp fiber went up against nylon. Hemp paper went up against that wood pulp method. Andrew Mellon, Secretary of the Treasury and the richest man in America, had sunk heavy money into DuPont. He was also Anslinger's father-in-law and had put him in that narcotics post himself. And finally, there was Standard Oil, the Rockefeller empire, raised up on petroleum. Hemp oil burned for fuel, struck at the very ground everything they sold stood on. These men had no need to scheme in the shadows. They had the newspapers, the Congress, the Bureau of Narcotics itself. Hearst's papers splashed front-page tales, tying marijuana to violence, to crime, and to a fear of other races. Anslinger stood before Congress with cases that carried no medical proof. The American Medical Association sent in Dr. William Woodward to oppose the act, and he told the Congress the claims had no science behind them. They waved his testimony aside. And after hearings that drew next to no notice, the act passed on the 2nd of August, 1937. Now, here is the one detail that makes that year the most important in the history of American energy, and hardly a soul remembers it. That very year, a fuel that went by Agrol was being sold at 2,000 service stations across the Midwest, 2,000 of them, from Indiana out to South Dakota. Agrol was an ethanol and gasoline blend, brewed up at a plant in Atchison, Kansas, behind the same Chemergy movement Ford had been pushing. There were 2 blends. Agrol 5 carried 5 to 7% alcohol. Agrol 10, 12 to 17.5. The Chemical Foundation had put up the money, and the plant opened in 1936. By the next year, drivers all over the heartland were topping off with it. The brochure put it this way: "Try a tankful and you will be thankful." The fuel did its job. It sold. Folks kept coming back, and then the men running the Atchison plant began reporting something they could no longer ignore: sabotage. The market rigged against them. Vicious, dirty fighting out of the petroleum industry. Agrol went for 17 cents the gallon. Leaded gasoline went for 16. 1 penny stood between them. The oil industry leaned on every tax break bill that might have shut that gap. The American Petroleum Institute came right out and called ethanol a lesser fuel. Between 1933 and 1939, the petroleum interests struck down 19 federal bills and 31 state bills aimed at the blending of alcohol fuel. The Institute's own spokesman, a fellow named Conger Reynolds, made sport of the movement, calling its people dream chemists and armchair farmers. By 1939, the Atchison Agrol plant had shut for good. 2,000 stations dropped off the map. A whole fuel network, built by farmers for farmers, rubbed out in under 3 years. The only commercial plant fuel system in America was finished. Wrecked inside the same 24-month stretch the Marijuana Tax Act put hemp in the ground. Same war, same years, different weapons, and the same men walking away winners. But there was one people who never quit growing it, and never wanted even one of those stations. My own. We put down roots in Lancaster County in the early 1700s, and the first of us to stay began planting hemp around 1710. By the 1720s, the Pennsylvania General Assembly was paying out bounties on every market-ready pound a man could raise. So much came in at harvest that when Lancaster County was made official in 1729, a whole township was named Hempfield for the sheer mountains grown there. In 1818, that township was split in two, East Hempfield and West Hempfield. Both names still stand today on road signs and county maps. Historian Les Stark turned up records of more than 100 water-powered mills working hemp fiber along the county's waterways before 1870. The Ephrata Cloister raised hemp. Susanna Wright raised it at Wright's Ferry Mansion. Edward Hand raised it at Rockford Plantation. The crop got spun into rope, into canvas, into lamp oil, into paper. Why, the very word canvas grew out of the word cannabis. That is how deep this plant ran. When that act buried hemp across America, we lost what our families had tended for 200 years. We made do. We always have. We turned to tobacco, we built up our dairy, we put in corn and soy like everybody else. But the know-how of what hemp could really do never slipped away. It lived on in that quiet memory where we keep every scrap of old wisdom, handed down at our kitchen tables, in the barn, from grandfather to grandson. The rest of America forgot the plant had ever been. We just tucked it away and waited. We are a patient people. We have outlived every fad, every passing trend, every government program that ever ordered us to change. And when the day finally came, we stood ready before anyone else. So when the Farm Bill of 2018 made hemp legal once more, we did not waste a minute around here. A young man from our own county, Reuben Ryle, out of Bart Township, started Lancaster County Cannabis right out of his basement. He began with 1 pound of CBD flower and a few smoke shops to sell to. Inside of 4 years, he had contracts running with Amish growers all over the county. By 2023, his outfit had moved 50,000 pounds of product. He partners with farmers who use no pesticides and no man-made fertilizer. Much of that crop they bring in by hand, with horse-drawn equipment, and need no electricity to work it up. The quality pulls top dollar from buyers in California and across the Midwest. We never needed a government program or a university trial to tell us what this plant was good for. We already knew. We have known it for 300 years. Now, if you already own your home and you are thinking this is only for folks with farms, stay with me. This next part is meant for you in particular. You do not need 40 acres. You do not need a barn either. Here is what will run on an ordinary lot, starting today. Own a diesel anything, a truck, a tractor, a generator, a pump, and you can fuel it with biodiesel pressed from hemp seed oil right now. You buy the cold-pressed oil by the bulk and mix it with methanol and a little lye in a reactor built from a used electric water heater for less than $300. The plans are online, free for the taking. The University of Connecticut put this very chemistry to the test back in 2010. Professor Richard Parnas and his crew ran fresh hemp seed oil through ordinary transesterification in a biofuels laboratory. 97% of that hemp oil turned over into biodiesel. Not 90, not 93, 97. It cleared every test, met the biodiesel standards of both America and Europe, and turned up something nobody expected. It ran better in the cold, holding up at lower temperatures than any biodiesel you could buy at the time. Parnas told reporters that a man already raising hemp might make fuel enough to power his whole farm off the seed alone. A single crop, a single press, a single reactor, and a man stands free of the fuel company altogether. Now for your gasoline engines. Hemp ethanol takes more doing, but it is every bit as real and legal. The federal government hands out a free fuel alcohol permit by way of the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau. Apply, get your approval, and you may lawfully distill ethanol for motor fuel on your own land. You are not cooking up drinking liquor, you are cooking up fuel. The gear is nothing but a small still and a fermenting tank, the kind folks build in their garages. The method is the same one moonshiners ran for hundreds of years. Only you are not hiding from a soul. There is a federal permit nailed to your wall. The ethanol you make can be cut into gasoline at 10 to 15% and burned in any ordinary gas engine without one single change. That is exactly what E10 and E15 already are down at the pump. You would only be making your own stock instead of buying another man's. And here is the thing nobody tells you. Down in Brazil, they worked this out back in the 1970s. Brazilian cars ran on blends holding as much as 24% ethanol. Millions of vehicles, decades of hard use, and no engines giving out. This is no experiment but a settled thing, proven for 50 years in another country. The one thing America ever lacked was the lawful right to grow the crop. And now you have it. Here is the arithmetic. A single acre of hemp gives up near 700 pounds of grain. Press it down and you get around 22 gallons of oil, which becomes roughly 20 gallons of biodiesel. That is fuel enough to keep a diesel generator humming for weeks or to keep a tractor rolling clear through planting season. That same acre also hands you better than 5,000 pounds of stalk, and the stalks make cellulosic ethanol through fermenting and distilling. Put the biodiesel off the seeds together with the ethanol off the stalks, and 1 acre of hemp feeds both kinds of engine from a single harvest. Work it up to 5 acres and you have real fuel production for a homestead. 10 acres and you near full energy self-sufficiency for a small farm. Farmers in Austria sorted this out years back with seed oil cooperatives. They press canola and sunflower down into biodiesel for their own rigs and never ask an oil company for leave. Not a thing stops an American landowner from doing the same with hemp. Nothing but 80 years of silence, kept on purpose, about what this one plant can really do. And that carries me to the piece I have been holding back, the one I dug out of a magazine archive hardly anybody cracks open anymore. This is the part I gave you my word on at the start. In February of 1938, Popular Mechanics ran a piece under the headline, "New Billion-Dollar Crop," and it was all about hemp. It told of a new machine, a thing called a decorticator, that could work hemp stalks cheaply and on an industrial scale. The article claimed hemp could yield more than 5,000 separate products out of the herds alone, and then textiles, food, and fuel from everything left over. It crowned hemp the world's standard fiber and foretold thousands of jobs and a whole new farming economy. Now here is what makes that document so terrible. It went to print a full 5 months after the marijuana tax had already taken hold. 5 months past the law that put the whole industry in the ground, the most read mechanics magazine in the land was telling American farmers they sat on top of $1 billion crop. Those editors had no idea the law had even passed. That is how quietly Anslinger and the men with him had buried it. By the time it reached the newsstands, it was already against the law to grow the very crop it was singing about. The future got announced at its own funeral, and not one person in the room knew it. That timing was no coincidence. It was a result. The men who drew up that law knew exactly what they were putting to death. They simply saw to it that the rest of the country never caught on until it was far too late. 80 years too late. Until a sheet of paper called the 2018 Farm Bill quietly reversed what 4 powerful men had pulled off. And hardly anyone noticed that either. We never read that article. We never sat in on Ford's Chemergy conferences nor stepped foot in Parnas's laboratory. We asked no man's leave to understand a crop our people had raised since before the revolution. We held on to the knowledge the way we hold on to all things, quietly, plainly, carried from one generation to the next, with nobody setting it down in a journal or printing it in a study. Rudolph Diesel drew up an engine for plant oil, then vanished off a ship before ever he could hand it over to the British Navy. Henry Ford, for his part, built a car out of hemp, fed it hemp fuel, and watched the law strike both down. 2,000 agro stations sold plant-based fuel and were sabotaged into closing. A magazine promised America a $1 billion crop 5 months after the law had buried it, and through 80 years of silence, we just kept growing. You were never meant to know a word of this. Not the 97%, not the 2,000 stations, not the magazine that turned up after the burial, not the engine stripped from plant oil and handed over to petroleum. You were meant to keep pulling into the gas station, keep watching that price crawl higher every winter, and never once ask who decided it had to be this way. We asked that question 300 years back and answered it with a single seed. If you are the sort who believes real knowledge has been quietly shoved aside to guard another man's profit, you already know what comes next. I want to hear it from you. If you could put in 1 acre of hemp this season, what is the first thing you would fuel? The truck, the tractor, the generator. Leave it in the comments. I read every last one, and what you tell me decides what we take up next. Go on and subscribe. Not for my sake, for the sake of what is still coming. Because the next video shows you what the Amish make from the one part of this plant nobody ever burns. And the industry that part threatens is bigger yet than this one. It is what most folks throw away. The part that becomes cloth and rope and the very walls of a house. They have made it for 300 years, and there is a good reason you were never shown how. I will see you there. So, until that day comes, stay independent, stay curious, and remember this. The folks who built this country with their own 2 hands knew things we are only now beginning to remember.